They say time heals all wounds, but at 88 years old, sitting here in the thick, humid heart of Georgia, I can tell you that time is nothing more than a master of silence. It doesn't heal. It simply teaches you how to live with the ghosts. It turns the screaming regrets of your youth into a low, constant hum, a what if that whispers through the Spanish moss-covered oaks of my porch every single morning, just as the blue mist begins to rise from the marshlands. Today is Valentine's Day. Outside, the world is a frantic blur of red ribbons, overpriced roses, and young men making promises they don't yet understand. But for me, this date is a tombstone. It is the anniversary of the day I committed the greatest sin a man can commit against himself. I traded my soul for the sake of a comfortable lie. My name is Beau. In 1962, I was 24 years old, and I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. You see, being a young black man in Georgia back then meant your life wasn't just yours. Every step you took was a reflection of your family, your church, and your community's dignity. My father was one of the few black landowners in the county. He had clawed that land out of the red Georgia clay with blood, sweat, and a determination that bordered on holy. I was his only son, the prince of a small, fragile empire of soil and respect. I was engaged to Mary Lou. If you could have seen her then, you would have understood why the choice seemed so easy. Mary Lou was a dream of silk and pearls. She was a Southern belle in every sense, poised, elegant, with a voice as smooth as Tupelo honey. Her father was the head deacon at our church, and our union wasn't just a marriage, it was a treaty. It was the merging of two legacies. With Mary Lou, my path was paved, but then there was Sarah. Sarah was a storm that I never saw coming. She wasn't from a prominent family. She didn't care about the gossip at the Sunday social or the shine on a man's shoes. She was a painter, a woman who lived in an old leaning shack on the edge of the marshes where the mosquitoes hummed and the air smelled of salt and turpentine. I met her when my truck overheated near her place. I walked up to her porch to ask for water, and I found her standing before a canvas, her dark skin splattered with streaks of cadmium yellow and Prussian blue. When she looked at me, she didn't see the heir to the estate or the successful businessman. She saw a man who was suffocating. "You look like you're holding your breath, Beau," she told me that first day, her voice raspy and real. For 6 months, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was the perfect fiancé. I sat in Mary Lou's parlor, sipping tea and discussing the guest list for a wedding that felt like a coronation. We talked about the brick house we would build, the children we would raise to be leaders, and the quiet, respectable life we would lead until the end of our days. Mary Lou was stability. She was the anchor that kept me from drifting into the dangerous waters of the 1960s South. But by night, or in those stolen hours of the afternoon, I was in Sarah's world. In that shack, the rules of Georgia didn't exist. Sarah didn't paint what things looked like. She painted what they felt like. She showed me that the marsh wasn't just mud and grass. It was a living, breathing symphony of shadows and light. With her, I learned that my life could be a masterpiece instead of a blueprint. She challenged me to think about what I wanted, not what my father or the deacons wanted. For the first time in my life, I was terrified because I was finally awake. Valentine's Day arrived in 1962, heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and the tension of a life about to break. Sarah had received a letter, an invitation to show her work at a small underground gallery in New Orleans. It was the chance she had been praying for. "I'm leaving, Beau," she told me, her hands gripping mine. Her fingers were rough with dried paint, a stark contrast to Mary Lou's soft, manicured palms. "There's a bus tonight. Come with me. We don't have to live the life they designed for us. New Orleans is wide, it's loud, and it's free. We can be whoever we want to be." That same evening, my father had organized a formal dinner. It was the official announcement of our wedding date. The house was filled with the smell of fried chicken, collard greens, and expensive cologne. The most influential black families in the state were there. My father stood at the head of the table, his hand on my shoulder, his voice booming with pride as he talked about the dynasty we were building. "I lived 40 years with Mary Lou. I want to be clear. She was a good woman. She was a queen. We built that brick house. We raised 3 children who became doctors and lawyers. We were the most respected couple in the county. I walked with my head high, and I did everything I was supposed to do. But every Valentine's Day, for 4 decades, I would find an excuse to drive out to the marshes. I would sit in my car and watch the sun go down over the water, and I would look for the ghost of a woman with paint-stained hands. I searched for Sarah in every newspaper, in every art magazine I could find. Years later, I saw a small feature on a woman who had become a legend in the New Orleans art scene. Her paintings were described as explosions of southern light and unspoken truth. She had lived a life of color. She had lived a life of fire. And I had lived a life of gray. The security I worked so hard for, the land I protected, the status I craved, it all feels so hollow now. Mary Lou passed away 10 years ago. She died holding my hand, thanking me for a perfect life. I cried at her funeral, not just because I lost her, but because of the guilt of knowing that while I had given her my presence, I had never truly given her my heart. That belonged to a girl in a shack who saw the colors in the mud. I was at a literal crossroads. On one side was the right path, the path of honor, of family, of security. It was the path that made my father's sacrifices worthwhile. It was the path where I would never be hungry, never be disrespected, and never be alone. On the other side was the wild path, the path of Sarah, of New Orleans, of uncertainty. It was a path where I might fail, where I might lose the respect of everyone I knew, but where I would finally, for the first time, be the architect of my own destiny. I looked at my father. I saw the gray in his hair and the hope in his eyes. I looked at Mary Lou, who was the embodiment of everything a good life was supposed to be, and I felt a cold, paralyzing fear. I wasn't afraid of failing Sarah. I was afraid of disappointing the world. I chose safety. I stayed in that chair. I raised my glass. I toasted to a future that at that very moment felt like a heavy stone being rolled over my grave. I heard the distant, mournful wail of the bus horn echoing through the trees, and I knew in the very marrow of my bones that my soul had just boarded that bus without me. Now, at 88, I sit on this porch and I look at my children and grandchildren. They talk about safety and career paths, and it takes everything in me not to scream. I want to grab them by the shoulders and tell them, comfort is a drug. It makes you forget that you are a miracle. It makes you trade your lightning for a steady light bulb. Don't choose the easy path just because it's paved. A paved road leads exactly where everyone else has already gone. The regret of a mistake, a failed business, a broken heart, a risky move. That pain eventually fades. But the regret of the no, the regret of the I stayed because I was afraid, that is a parasite. It eats you from the inside out until there's nothing left but a shell in a suit. If you are young and you are listening to this, and there is a Sarah in your life, an idea, a person, a dream that makes your heart race and your palms sweat, don't let the bus leave without you. Don't worry about what the deacons will say or what your father will think. They lived their lives. This one is yours. I am 88 years old. I have thousands of acres, a beautiful home, and the respect of the entire state of Georgia. And I would trade every single bit of it, every cent, every honor to go back to that night in 1962. I would stand up from that dinner table. I would kiss Mary Lou on the forehead and tell her she deserves a man who truly loves her. And I would run. I would run until my lungs burned. I would jump onto that silver bus, and I would spend the rest of my life painting the world in colors that don't have names. But I didn't, and that is a weight I will carry into the ground. Don't be like me. Don't be safe. Be brave. Be alive.